No mai, haere mai. Welcome to the Maxim Institute podcast. I'm Jason, the communications manager here at Maxim. Each week, we pair our latest column with an insightful conversation, taking you behind the scenes of our weekly columns and chatting with the authors to unpack the research, ideas, and discussions that shape their work. Get ready to dig into the latest topic. Today, we talk to researcher Dr. Stephanie Worboys about her recent column. Stephanie, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you back with us this week, talking about your latest column for Maxim, Why Our Young Are Leaving and Why They May Not Return. Now, you draw out in your column a whole bunch of stats that point to people leaving New Zealand. What drew you to this column, to write this?
Well, last week I was doing some reading, just kind of keeping up to date with what was going on in the news, and I came across an article published by RNZ, and it was talking about how a record number of New Zealanders had left the country in the year to date to 2024, and that the majority of those people were young people. And that really captured my interest because I left my home country of the United States when I was in my early 20s. And it occurred to me that leaving is easy, returning is very hard. Once you build a life somewhere, even if you miss your family back home, it's really not so easy to go back. So the idea that they're just going away for a season might not turn out to be true.
So in your case, you moved from America to New Zealand and you feel like that you miss your home, but you're like, actually, I'd only go home for a visit, or?
Yeah, going home is for visiting family. I mean, I'll always be an American in my heart, but I'm also a Kiwi now too. And I've built a life here, and I don't want to start over back in the States. So I didn't realize that was the decision that I made when I moved here. I thought I'll be here for a few years, but I can always go home. And I suppose I could always go home, but the idea of starting again is really off-putting.
Starting again, I guess, in that you'd have to find employment, do all that stuff that you've, buy a house,
and building
everything.
Connections, and you're integrated in a place once you're there for a few years. And I think in the case of the young people leaving to go to Australia, where wages are better, it's very hard to return somewhere if you think you're going to have to live on less as well. Yeah,
you get used to living a certain way, a certain standard, and then
I'm used to the weather here. I don't want to go back to the cold winters in Minnesota. Right. Yeah. It's too easy to just get in your car and drive without having to dig it out of the snow. So there are things you get used to.
Yeah. Okay. So our young people are leaving, particularly in that age group where you've identified that they are kind of building a life for themselves, as it is. Like you say, when we were talking earlier about you said it like they're kind of putting a stake in the ground in a sense, and they're saying, I'm going to build my community, do all those things here. Why is that a problem for us here in New Zealand, that these young people are leaving?
Well, it can certainly be a problem for our economy. The less working age people we have, the less money there is to go around as far as funding our infrastructure, funding our healthcare system, funding our pension. We need young people who want to live here and want to build a life here. But also, a society without young people is a society without innovation. It's a society without fun. So we need them for social reasons as well.
Yeah, I like that. It's not just about, because often we talk about, and in columns that I've written in the past, we talk about young people leaving or our aging population, and we talk about it and frame it in economic terms. But I like how you've said that it's not just about money or infrastructure or taxes or that sort of thing, but it's actually about the substance of the society that we want, and the fact that young people, young families, they add something to it. And you did mention as well the idea of older people spending their golden years in different countries to their kids, and that's something that I think struck me.
Yeah, I think when we talk about it in purely economic terms, then there's a bit of a intergenerational war that happens where, the older people are like, back in my day, it was difficult too, but we are having a record number of young people leaving, and that isn't just going to impoverish our economy. And I would caution the older generation to consider what it's like to spend your golden years with your children and grandchildren living in another country. It's actually a bit lonely. You want to spend that time with them. You're not working, you've got the time to spend, but there's no one to spend it with. So I think we need to keep that in mind as well.
I like how you said older people tend to say, back in my day, it was just as hard, because that is one of the things that often comes up, right? You go, young people are just young, and they complain about those sorts of things, and that's just, but it's always been like this. Is that the case, or are there objective measures that we can look at?
Yeah, when I was researching this, I came across a study that was published in 2023, and it looked at the wealth gap between generations in the Anglosphere, so the UK, the United States, all of those areas. And it noted that from the Industrial Revolution to the generation born in 1950, that each generation was wealthier, but it peaked for the generation born in 1950, and every generation after that has been poorer and poorer and poorer. So anyone born in 1960 was poorer than someone born in 1950, and someone born in 1970 is poorer than someone born in 1960 if you look at them at the same age and stage in their life. So there has been a marketable decline in economic circumstances for the generations. And what I found interesting about this study is it asked the question, is that because young people are wastefully spending and not saving?
They just don't have any discipline, right? They're like, I want this thing, so
they
I'm
want to
going to
buy
get
the
it.
newest iPhone, and they're not saving. And the study found that that wasn't the case. Wow. They actually concluded that they were in harder circumstances, and those circumstances had to do with wages not keeping up with the cost of living. And even more so, that investments costed more in comparison to incomes, most notably housing. And then once those young people got those investments, the return on that investment was less. So it was harder and harder for them to actually accumulate the same wealth that their parents and grandparents had accumulated.
Which is really fascinating, because I recall a lot of people of my parents' generation talking about how difficult it was in the 80s with like super high interest rates and stuff. Like it was so hard to buy a house and stuff like that. But you have a different theory about that, don't you?
Well, I think it's really easy to overlook how high interest rates can actually place a cap on the cost of housing, because if the interest rates are so high and then if house prices keep growing, then it makes buying and selling unaffordable. And so if you have a high interest rate, housing prices don't climb as much because people just can't buy and sell. So it's actually a benefit to previous generations that they had that higher interest rate. Whereas now the housing prices just so far exceed wages that for a lot of young people, it's a pipe dream to own a house.
Even with their KiwiSaver and everything like that, just because, like you say, those costs have gone up so much in proportion to the average wage and that sort of thing. So then what can we do to fix that problem? Are there things that we can do? Is it a policy issue? Is it a society issue? Is it a generational issue? I mean, you've talked a little bit about the kind of intergenerational contract. Is that something maybe you could expand on that would give us some guidance in how we might solve this issue?
Well, I think that it's a multifaceted issue, and there are certain advantages that the Australian economy has that we can't policy fix our way into.
That's true. They've got like 5 times the amount of people in the country. And
and they've got some industry that we don't have here. They have some natural resources that they can leverage that we don't have here. So in one sense, we can't compete with Australia, but we can leverage some of the things and change some of the things we're doing here. So housing has been an issue for a long time. As long as I've lived in New Zealand, people have been wringing their hands about the housing crisis, and I haven't really seen much change since I've been here. And I think we could have done more, and we could be doing more. And my colleague is publishing a discussion paper, I think next week, about this issue. He did a deep dive, and what he concluded is that one thing we can really do to help the housing situation is to free up some land. So we need to be building up and out, and that will bring down the housing prices, because when you increase demand, then that brings down.
We sort of have an artificially imposed housing land shortage here in New Zealand, and that so much of our land is undeveloped. So that's one thing we could do is open up land for development. Are there other policy things? Because I think one of the things, like you say, we can't do is compete directly economically with Australia, but there may be other things that we can do so that people don't necessarily want to leave to go there, because they're like, well, Australia may have maybe higher wages, but there are other things that I'm going to miss out on.
Well, I think it gets back to that idea of the intergenerational contract, which is really a partnership between the generations. And the idea is that a strong intergenerational partnership shares the benefits and the burdens of society equitably. And I think at the moment we're falling down a little bit on that. And I think one of those issues has to do with the way that we haven't really kept up with our infrastructure needs. And so the previous generations and the current generation are sort of kicking the cost can of that down the road to other generations. And as I've already pointed out, they're poorer than their parents and their grandparents. And so they are not as well positioned to handle those extra costs. And so it can be a matter of fairness that we've decided to overlook those needs and pass it on to those generations.
Fair.
No, it's not very fair.
They're not as wealthy and they're expected to pay more. That doesn't seem very fair. It's not very Kiwi.
That's right. And I think it's the dreaded superannuation conversation, but it's a conversation that we need to have as a nation, which most of the Western world is going to need to have, because there is a large difference in population between the baby boomers and the generations that have come after them. And so we're asking more and more working age people to support the superannuations of a sort of ballooning retiree class. And so we're asking them to pitch in more than previous generations, because there's less of them. They have more to support and there are less of them. And so we're going to have to address that. And I think that is a fairness issue, that the younger generations are going to feel some intergenerational strife of, I have to support more retirees than my parents did, and I don't have a house, and I can't see the GP whenever I want, and the infrastructure is falling down around me. They're going to feel that they're a bit shortchanged, and that awareness will keep growing, because the retiree population is growing, and over the next sort of 50 years, there's going to be less and less working age people supporting them. Yeah,
you made the note in your column that in the 60s it was one retiree to every 7 working people, and now it's 1 to 4.
Yeah.
And by 2050, it's going to be 1 to 2.
Well, just shy of 2, actually. It's like 1.8.
Oh, man. Yeah. So it's almost, So it is, big conversations we need to have.
Something will have to change before we get, it won't get to that point. Something will have to change. And I think it's probably better that we deal with it now before we lose even more young people.
Well, here's hoping that we can have that conversation as a society. We've written a few columns on this issue at Maxim. And so hopefully people are listening and we'll be able to have this conversation as a country before it gets to that and something just gives. But thanks for being with us, Steph, and we look forward to reading the column.
Thanks for having me. Older generations love to complain that young people are lazy or entitled. Younger people argue that life is more challenging now than it's ever been. What's certain is that New Zealand is losing young people in record numbers. More 25 to 34-year-olds are voting with their feet by heading overseas for better opportunities. We need to ask, have we broken an intergenerational contract, leaving the future of our nation shortchanged? Many have shipped off to Australia. It makes sense. We're in a cost of living crisis, and wages are often significantly better there. The cost of living is often lower too. While their reasons for leaving are understandable, there's a very strong argument that we haven't done enough to make New Zealand a place worth staying in. Starting a family and building a life in New Zealand is challenging. Stagnant wages and the rising cost of living make it difficult for young people to save money, invest in their futures, or even cover day-to-day expenses. Essentials such as utilities, groceries, and transportation have become increasingly expensive, stretching household budgets thin. The healthcare system is under pressure, struggling to keep up with the demand for services, which often results in long wait times and limited access to care. Compounding these issues is the housing crisis. The limited availability of affordable houses makes it difficult for young people to get a foot in the door. We have been wringing our hands about this problem for over a decade, but have failed to solve it. Some of these challenges are simply the luck of the draw. None of us gets to choose the time or circumstances into which we are born, and we must play the hand we are dealt. However, not all of the challenges facing young people today are due to uncontrollable forces. Some stem from mismanagement. We have failed to keep up with our infrastructure needs, for example, kicking the can down the road for other generations to pay. New Zealand's aging population puts added pressure on young workers. In the 1960s, the ratio of workers to retirees was high, with 7 working-age Kiwis for every retiree. However, this ratio has dramatically decreased. Today, that number has dropped to 4, and within 50 years, it's expected to fall to just shy of 2. On top of supporting more retirees than ever, today's workers also contribute to the NZSF, which means they are partially funding their own future pensions, a burden other generations have not had to bear. The exodus of our young is a clear signal that the intergenerational contract is under strain. To safeguard the nation's future, policymakers must act now. By focusing on affordable housing, fixing our infrastructure, and rethinking superannuation, we can create a society where all its members can thrive. We must ensure that future generations are not shortchanged and that they inherit a society as good as, if not better, than the one we received. Our viability as a nation depends on it.
Thanks for tuning in to the Maxim Institute podcast. If you want to stay updated on our latest research and insights into New Zealand politics and policy, sign up for our monthly forum email and event invites on our website. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. From the team at Maxim, mā te wā. Goodbye for now.